Continued, Chapter 12 of Shirley by Charlotte Bronte. Miss Helstone's new acquaintance soon became of value to her. Their society was acknowledged a privilege. She found she would have been in error indeed to have let slip this chance of relief, to have neglected to avail herself of this happy change. A turn was thereby given to her thoughts, a new channel was opened for them, which, diverting a few of them at least from the one direction in which all had hitherto tended, abated the impetuosity of their rush, and lessened the force of their pressure on one worn-down point. Soon she was content to spend whole days at Field Head, doing by turns whatever Shirley or Mrs. Pryor wished her to do, and now one would claim her, now the other. Nothing could be less demonstrative than the friendship of the elder lady, but also nothing could be more vigilant, assiduous, untiring. I have intimated that she was a peculiar personage, and in nothing was her peculiarity more shown than in the nature of the interest she evinced from Caroline. She watched all her movements. She seemed as if she would have guarded all her steps. It gave her pleasure to be applied to by Miss Helstone for advice and assistance. She yielded her aid, when asked, with such quiet yet obvious enjoyment, that Caroline ere long took delight in depending on her. Shirley Kildar's complete docility with Mrs. Pryor had at first surprised Miss Helstone, and not less the fact of the reserved ex-governess being so much at home and at ease in the residence of her young pupil, where she filled with such quiet independency a very dependent post. But she soon found that it needed but to know both ladies to comprehend fully the enigma. Every one, it seemed to her, must like, must love, must prize Mrs. Pryor when they knew her. No matter that she perseveringly wore old-fashioned gowns, that her speech was formal and her manner cool, that she had 20 little ways such as nobody else had. She had still such a stay, such a counsellor, so truthful, so kind in her way that, in Caroline's idea, none once accustomed to her presence could easily afford to dispense with it. As to dependency or humiliation, Caroline did not feel it in her intercourse with Shirley, and why should Mrs. Pryor? The heiress was rich, very rich, compared with her new friend. One possessed a clear 1,000 a year, and the other not a penny, and yet there was a safe sense of equality experienced in her society, never known in that of the ordinary Briarfield and Winbury gentry. The reason was Shirley's head ran on other things than money and position. She was glad to be independent as to property. By fits she was even elated at the notion of being lady of the manor and having tenants and an estate. She was especially tickled with the agreeable complacency when reminded of all that property down in the hollow, comprising an excellent cloth mill, dye house, warehouse, together with the Messuage gardens and outbuildings termed Hollow's Cottage. But her exultation, being quite undisguised, was singularly inoffensive, and for her serious thoughts they tended elsewhere. To admire the great, reverence the good, to be joyous with the genial, was very much the bent of Shirley's soul. She mused, therefore, on the means of following this bent far oftener than she pondered on her social superiority. In Caroline, Miss Kildare had first taken an interest, because she was quiet, retiring, looked delicate, and seemed as if she needed someone to take care of her. Her predilection increased greatly when she discovered that her own way of thinking and talking was understood and responded to by this new acquaintance. She had hardly expected it. Miss Helstone, she fancied, had too pretty a face, manners, and voice too soft to be anything out of the common way in mind and attainments. And she very much wondered to see the gentle features light up archly to the revile of a dry sally or two risked, or too risked by herself, and more did she wonder to discover the self-won knowledge treasured and the untaught speculations working in that girlish, curl-veiled head. Caroline's instincts of taste, too, were like her own. Such books as Miss Kildare had read with the most pleasure were Miss Helstone's delight also. They held many aversions too in common, and could have the comfort of laughing together over works of false sentimentality and pompous pretension. Few, Shirley conceived, men or women, have the right taste in poetry, the right sense for discriminating between what is real and what is false. She had again and again heard very clever people pronounce this or that passage, in this or that versifier, altogether admirable, which, when she read, her soul refused to acknowledge as anything but cant, flourish, and tinsel, or at the best elaborate wordiness, curious, clever, learned, perhaps haply even tinged with the fascinating hues of fancy, but, God knows, as different from real poetry as the gorgeous and massy vase of mosaic is from the little cup of pure metal. Or to give the reader a choice of similes, as the milliner's artificial wreath is from the fresh gathered lily of the field. Caroline, she found, felt the value of the true ore, and knew the deception of the flashy dross. The minds of the two girls, being toned in harmony, often chimed very sweetly together. One evening they chanced to be alone in the oak parlour. They had passed a long wet day together without ennui. It was now on the edge of dark. Candles were not yet brought in, both, as twilight deepened, grew meditative and silent. A western wind roared high round the hall, driving clouds and stormy rain up from the far remote ocean. All was tempest outside, the antique lattices, all deep peace within. Shirley sat at the window, watching the wrack in heaven, the mist on earth, listening to certain tones of the gale that planed like restless spirits, notes which, had she not been so gay and healthy, would have swept her trembling nerves like some omen, some anticipatory dirge. In this, her prime of existence and bloom of beauty, they but subdued vivacity to pensiveness. Snatches of sweet ballads haunted her ear. Now and then she sang a stanza. Her accents obeyed the fitful impulse of the wind. They swelled as its gusts rushed on, and died as they wandered away. Caroline, withdrawn to the farthest and darkest end of the room, her figure just discernible by the ruby shine of the flameless fire, was pacing to and fro, muttering to herself fragments of well-remembered poetry. She spoke very low, but Shirley heard her, and while singing softly she listened. This was the strain. Obscurest night involved the sky, the Atlantic billows roared, when such a destined wretch as I washed headlong from on board. Of friends of hope of all bereft, his floating home forever left. Here the fragment stopped, because Shirley's song, erewhile somewhat full and shrilling, had become delicate, faint. Go on, said she. Then you go on too. I was only repeating the castaway. I know. If you can remember it all, say it all. And as it was nearly dark, and after all Miss Kildare was no formidable auditor, Caroline went through it. She went through it as formidable as she should have gone through it. The wild sea, the drowning mariner, the reluctant ship swept on in the storm. You heard her realized by her. And more vividly was realized the heart of the poet, who did not weep for the castaway, but who, in an hour of tearless anguish, traced a semblance to his own God-abandoned misery in the fate of that man-forsaken sailor, and cried from the depths where he struggled. No voice divine the storm allied, no light propitious, sorry, no light propitious. No light propitious shone, when snatched from all effectual aid, we perished each alone. But I, beneath a rougher sea, and the whelmed in deeper gulfs than he. I hope William Cowper is safe and calm in heaven now, said Caroline. Do you pity what he suffered on earth? asked Miss Kildare. Pity him, Shirley. What can I do else? He was nearly broken-hearted when he wrote that poem, and it almost breaks one's heart to read it. But he found relief in writing it, I know he did. And that gift of poetry, the most divine bestowed on man, was, I believe, granted to allay emotions with their strength when their strength threatens harm. It seems to me, Shirley, that nobody should write poetry to exhibit intellect or attainment. Who cares for that sort of poetry? Who cares for learning? Who cares for fine words in poetry? And who does not care for feeling, real feeling, however simply, even rudely expressed? It seems you care for it at all events, and certainly in hearing that poem, one discovers that Cowper was under an impulse strong as that of the wind which drove the ship, an impulse which, while it would not suffer him to stop to add adornment to a single stanza, filled him with force to achieve the whole with consummate perfection. You managed to recite it with a steady voice, Caroline. I wonder thereat. Cowper's hand did not tremble in writing the lines. Why should my voice falter in repeating it? Depend on it, Shirley, no tear blistered the manuscript of The Castaway. I hear it no sob of sorrow. I hear in it no sob of sorrow, only the cry of despair. That cry uttered, I believe the deadly spasm passed from his heart, that he wept abundantly and was comforted. Shirley resumed her ballad, Minstrelsy. Stopping short, she remarked ere long, one could have loved Cowper if it were only for the sake of having the privilege of comforting him. You never would have loved Cowper, rejoined Caroline promptly. He was not made to be loved by a woman. What do you mean? What I say, I know there is a kind of natures in the world. I know there is a kind of natures in the world, and very noble, elevated natures too, whom love never comes near. You might have sought Cowper with the intention of loving him, and you would have looked at him, pitied him, and left him, forced away by a sense of the impossible, the incongruous, as the crew were borne from their drowning comrade by the furious blast. You may be right. Who told you this? And what I say of Cowper, I should say of Rousseau. Was Rousseau ever loved? He loved passionately, but was his passion ever returned? I am certain never. And if there were any female Cowpers and Rousseaus, I should assert the same of them. Who told you this? I asked. Did Moore? Why should anybody have told me? Have I not an instinct? Can I not divine an analogy? Moore never talked to me either about Cowper or Rousseau or love. The voice we hear in solitude told me all I know on these subjects. Do you like characters of the Rousseau order, Caroline? Not at all. As the whole, I sympathise intensely with certain qualities they possess. Certain divine sparks in their nature dazzle my eyes and make my soul glow. Then again, I scorn them. They are made of clay and gold. I refuse, and the refuse and the ore make a mass of weakness. Taken all together, I feel them unnatural, unhealthy, repulsive. I dare say I should be more tolerant of a Rousseau than you would, Carrie. Submissive and contemplative yourself, you like the stern and the practical. By the way, you must miss that cousin. By the way, you must miss that cousin Robert of yours very much, now that you and he never meet. I do, and he must miss you. That he does not. I cannot imagine, pursued Sir Shirley, who had lately got a habit of introducing Moore's name into the conversation, even when it seemed to have no business there. I cannot imagine but that he was fond of you, since he took so much notice of you, talked to you, and taught you so much. He never was fond of me. He never professed to be fond of me. He took pains to prove that he only just tolerated me. Caroline, determined not to err on the flattering side in estimating her cousin's regard for her, always now habitually thought of it and mentioned it in the most scanty measure. She had her own reasons for being less sanguine than ever in hopeful views of the future, less indulgent to pleasurable retrospections of the past. Of course, then, observed Miss Kildare, you only just tolerated him in return? Surely, men and women are so different. They are in such a different position. Women have so few things to think about, men so many. You may have a friendship for a man while he is almost indifferent to you. Much of what cheers your life may be dependent on him, while not a feeling or interest of moment in his eyes may have reference to you. Robert used to be in the habit of going to London sometimes for a week or a fortnight together. Well, while he was away, I found his absence a void. There was something wanting. Briarfield was duller. Of course, I had my usual occupation, still I missed him. As I sat by myself in the evenings, I used to feel a strange certainty of conviction I cannot describe, that if a magician or a genius had at that moment offered me Prince Ali's tube, you remember it in the Arabian Nights, and if with its aid I had been enabled to take a view of Robert to see where he was, how occupied I should have learned, in a startling manner, the width of the chasm which gaped between such as he and such as I. I knew that, however, my thoughts might adhere to him, his were effectually sundered from me. Caroline, demanded Miss Kildare abruptly, don't you wish you had a profession, a trade? I wish it 50 times a day. As it is, I often wonder what I came into the world for. I long to have something absorbing and compulsory to fill my head and my hands and to occupy my thoughts. Can labour alone make a human being happy? No, but it can give varieties of pain and prevent us from breaking our hearts with a single tyrant master torture. Besides, successful labour was its recompense. A vacant, weary, lonely, hopeless life has none. By hard labour and learned professions, they say, make women masculine, coarse. But hard labour and learned professions, they say, make women masculine, coarse, unwomanly. And what does it signify whether unmarried and never to be married women are unattractive and inelegant or not? Provided only they are decent, decorous, and neat, it is enough. The utmost which ought to be required of old maids, in the way of appearance, is that they should not absolutely offend men's eyes as they pass them in the street. For the rest, they should be allowed, without too much scorn, to be as absorbed, grave, plain-looking, and plain-dressed as they please. You might be an old maid yourself, Caroline, you speak so earnestly. I shall be one. It is my destiny. I will never marry a Malone or a Sykes, and no one else will ever marry me. Here fell a long pause. Shirley broke it. Again the name by which she seemed bewitched was almost the first on her lips. Lina, did not Moore call you Lina sometimes? Yes, it is sometimes used as the abbreviation of Caroline in his native country. Well, Lina, do you remember my one day noticing an inequality in your hair? A curl wanting on that right side, and you're telling me it was Robert's fault, as he had once cut therefrom a long lock. Yes, if he is and always has as indifferent to you as you say, why did he steal your hair? I don't know. Yes, I do. It was my doing, not his. Everything of that sort always was my doing. He was going from home to London as usual, and the night before he went, I had found in his sister's work-box a lock of black hair, a short, round curl. Hortense told me it was her brother's and a keepsake. He was sitting near the table. I looked at his head. He has plenty of hair. On his temples were many such round curls. I thought he could spare me one. I knew I should like to have it, and I asked for it. He said on condition that he might have his choice of a dress from my head. So he got one of my long locks of hair, and I got one of his short ones. I keep his, but I dare say he has lost mine. It was my doing, and one of those silly deeds it distresses the heart and sets the face on fire to think of. One of those small but sharp recollections that return, lacerating your self-respect like tiny penknives, and forcing from your lips as I sit alone sudden, insane-sounding interjections. Caroline! I do think myself a fool, Shirley, in some respects. I do despise myself. But I said I would not make you my confessor, for you cannot reciprocate foible for foible. You are not weak. How steadily you watch me now! Turn aside your clear, strong, she-eagle eye. It is an insult to fix it on me thus. What a study of character you are! Weak? Certainly, but not in the sense you think. Come in. Come in. Sorry, let's do that again. What a study of character you are! Weak? Certainly, but not in the sense you think. There's a knock. Come in. This was said in answer to a tap at the door. Miss Kildare happened to be near it at the moment, Caroline at the other end of the room. She saw a note put into Shirley's hands and heard the words, "From Mr. Moore, ma'am." "Bring candles," said Miss Kildare. Caroline sat expectant. "A communication on business," said the heiress, but when candles were brought, she neither opened nor read it. The rector's Fanny was presently announced, and the rector's niece, Caroline, went home. My bloody thing.